Good afternoon to everyone. We have had a previous session where we both discussed some of these issues, but I'll reintroduce myself once again. I'm Radmila Šekerinska. In the period of 2002 until 2006, I was a Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Macedonia, and in two, well, I would say rather short instances, I was acting Prime Minister, which was the reason why this title appeared on the program. Currently, I'm a member of the Macedonian Parliament. I'm heading the so-called National Council for European Integration, and as some of the others, we're trying to be the opposition who is both constructive, not frustrated with the lack of power, but really interested in moving one step forward. And as a consolation, probably, if we were in government, some of us would not have made it for the ICD conference, having in mind all the different obligations. So this is the advantage of being in opposition for some time, not for too long, though. I want to make two comments, and because of the time limit, I'll stick to the first one and then use some of the questions to come up with the second comment. I remember, because we have been discussing a lot about climate change and environment, I remembered the old saying that we used very frequently in the past about thinking globally and acting locally. I think we have used it so much that it has become a bore, so we never mention it in our discussions. Well, I would use this sentence in the context of global leadership in building a world without walls. Because ICD was very optimistic, and the session that we have to speak today on is global leadership in a world without walls. Unfortunately, we are still not there. What we need in this moment of time is world leadership for building a world without walls. And I think, although your comment was slightly in a different direction, that in order to preach world without walls, we have to be prepared to deal with the walls that exist in our local communities, in our countries, and in our regions. And usually this is actually more difficult, because for me, as a citizen of Macedonia, it's very easy to tell Cypriots that they should solve their problem, and that it's absurd to keep on living in a divided island for 40 years. For me, it is easy to ask our Bosnian friends that they should solve their differences. But once I start dealing with my own issues and divisions and problems, it becomes trickier, especially when we are elected politicians. And when the public opinion is very favorable of consensus and dialogue and solutions, but sometimes very, very critical when actually these solutions are on the table. And the morning session about Cyprus was very telling. Everyone is interested about finding a solution, and then it's offered to the citizens, and probably some of the politicians didn't do their job properly, and then it's not supported. So how come we are so eager to talk about other people's walls and so tough at accepting solutions and compromise when we're dealing with our own walls? And in order not to just practice this bad phenomenon, I'll say just a few words about the walls that we have had and we are still experiencing in Macedonia. I have been, as I said, a minister in one of the governments, but even before we were elected, we have participated in the discussions on a so-called Ohrid peace agreement, which was signed in 2001 after a relatively short conflict compared to some of the other Balkan experiences. And the negotiations were not easy. The solutions were not popular, and the decisions that we had to make were tough. I do think that in this moment Macedonia has passed most of its hurdles dealing with a divided community in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, and in terms of language. I think that the more visible political walls are behind us. We have broken them down with, I would say, a sound compromise. Nevertheless, I think that now we have to deal with more delicate, invisible walls. And these are especially walls that exist in our education, in which children of different ethnic background study in different schools, have different classes, they do not meet, and therefore it is easy for them to fall prey of stereotypes, hatred, and skepticism. And this is why now that we are celebrating the fall of this visible wall, I think that we should be more worried about the many invisible walls that we have been discussing about these days. The walls between different ethnicities, the walls between the citizens in Europe and the immigration, the walls between minority groups, which are sometimes marginalized and sometimes threatened. And I think that these walls will probably be more difficult to tackle than the physical walls like the Berlin one. So I think that we have to take one step at a time. The visible, the invisible, and then I would say, according to me, the most difficult thing, the walls of indifference. Because they exist when we are dealing with the problems, I don't know, in Africa, we are not dealing with visible, even invisible, we are dealing with walls of indifference. Indifference towards the others whose pain and whose problems we are not experiencing on a daily basis. And this is why we do need global leadership. We, I think, should start from home. And then, having the arguments in our hands and having some positive experiences, maybe try to preach global leadership and the world without walls outside of our countries. Thank you. Well, let the search for a superman or a superwoman begin. I mean, I don't think that we can find such person, let alone persons. I think that the global leaders can emerge only if they manage to first present themselves and prove themselves to be good national leaders, and then start thinking in the wider context. Because I really think that most of the issues that were raised here today, like the environment, the financial stability, peace and prosperity, are actually part of our selfish national interests. The European Union, each of the continents have seen the negative consequences of wars in the neighborhood. Each of us is experiencing negative consequences of global warming or environmental damage. The problem that I think is more pressing is the short-termism that we all suffer from in politics. You know, we all care, okay, the 4-year mandate is the bar. And I don't think about the consequences for the next 10 years. And I think that this is actually, to a certain extent, a more limiting factor than the national interests themselves. But going to the second question, I really think that it's impossible, as I said, to find super people. I really think that it's a question of how do we envisage a community of leaders that will have different kinds of qualities. I do think that intelligence can be overestimated because we have seen in our history enormous damage done to this world by very intelligent despots, dictators, tyrants. So intelligence is one part of the puzzle, but I think that what is missing a lot in our political debates these days is the question of values. It has become almost, how can I say, not only acceptable, but needed to be cynical and basically valueless. And if you are like this, then you can succeed in politics. And I think that these kinds of explanations are not helping us get the right people into politics. Most of the young people of today, unfortunately, will turn either to business or non-governmental sector or non-profit organizations if they want to change the world. And I think that this is an unsustainable situation in which the decision makers are not selected out of the few good, but out of the few who are willing to have a very bad reputation and actually have the interest of getting the benefit of doing politics. And the third question, I agree with you. We have a very gender unbalanced global scene. Trying to speak about it without being seen as self-interested. But I think that most of the big actors in the international scene, they all have their aid programs. And they do a lot of development programs. And I think that most of them have the gender aspect in it. So they say, okay, we will improve poverty, but we'll have to pay attention to the gender aspect. And we'll have to empower women. And we want to see more women in politics. And it all looks great on paper. And then you see the picture of G8. And if it was not for Germany, it would have been a completely male-dominated world. And unfortunately, no policy has been discussed to change this reality. So I do think that we will have to accept living in a more male-dominated global scene than we would wish for. And I do hope that some of the positive examples, like the German one or several other newly elected prime ministers and presidents, will change the attitude. Because I think that some kind of a gender balance will bring other kinds of balances in politics, in terms of values, in terms of representation, in terms of democracy. Thank you.